All right, hello and good morning. So we're going to look at 4 problems that are very, very similar to what you're about to see on today's quiz. So I highly recommend you pull out some sheets of paper and take some notes and observe closely because everything you're about to see is a brief recap to help prepare you for the quiz you'll be taking, probably in about 20 minutes. So we're going to start with just subtracting polynomials. So when we subtract polynomials, we need to subtract the entire polynomial. We need to subtract all terms. In other words, you'll need to distribute that negative. All right. So we have, bringing everything down, 7x to the fourth minus 8x to the fifth plus 5, just bringing that down, and distribute the negative. So minus 2x to the fourth minus 2. Remember, when you subtract a negative, minus negative is like addition. So when you distribute the negative, it's basically just a sign change. Pause here for a moment, let you write that down, study it, take a look at it. We're now going to start combining like terms, and we normally write what's in standard form or what we call descending order. So for descending order, what that means is we are going to go ahead and start with the largest exponent first. Notice the biggest exponent here is exponent 5, so I'm going to combine all my x to the fifths, which are these two right here. So we've got negative 8 plus 5. So you add those together, negative 8 plus 5 is going to be negative 3 x to the fifth. All right. And what I like to do is I like to lightly scratch those out when I combine them. So those have been combined. Now let's combine all of our x to the fourths here and here, just combining like terms. So 7x to the fourth minus 2x to the fourth, 7 minus 2 is positive 5 x to the fourth. Whenever I combine them, I like to lightly scratch them out. And then the last like terms are the constants. 5 minus 2 is plus 3. So this will be very, very similar to one of your problems on today's quiz. So again, in summary, distribute the negative, combine like terms. That's how you subtract polynomials. Let's go ahead and look at some multiplication. So let's go ahead and multiply. We've got 3 things we're multiplying here. I'll give you guys a moment to write that down. We're going to go ahead and multiply negative 2x times 3x minus 5 times 4 plus 2x. You'll have something very similar to this on the quiz. You have something very similar to this on the homework you just turned in. When we multiply, we can only multiply 2 things at a time. So if I go off to the side, for example, if I asked you to do 2 times 3 times 4, you wouldn't multiply all of those at the same time. You'd say, okay, well, 2 times 3 is 6, and then 6 times 4 is 24. You can only multiply 2 things really at a time. That's exactly what we're going to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply these 2. So when I multiply these 2, negative 2x times 3x, negative 2 times 3 is negative 6, x times x is x squared. Then negative 2x times negative 5, negative 2 times negative 5 is positive 10. And then we got an x. I have to keep that in parentheses. It's absolutely critical that I keep this product in parentheses. I've got to take this entire product, not just part of it, the whole entire product, and I have to multiply it to this binomial, 4 plus 2x. I have to apply that distributive property. So all I did is multiply the first 2. Pause there for a moment. And now let's multiply these 2 binomials. This is basically just FOIL. So I'm going to multiply everything by the first term. Negative 6x squared to everything. So negative 6x squared times 4, negative 6 times 4 is negative 24. x squared. Negative 6 times positive 2 is negative 12. And then x squared times x gives me x cubed. There's 3 x's there. Notice I've multiplied everything by negative 6x squared. I have finished distributing that, so I go to the next term, which is 10x, and distribute that. 10 times 4 is 40. 10 times 2 is 20, and then x times x is x squared. And now I have exhausted all multiplication. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is combine like terms. Remember, when we write it in standard order, we put the biggest exponent first. So the biggest exponent is x cubed. Notice that's the only term that has an x cubed, so there's nothing to combine with it. The next biggest one is x squared, and notice I've got 2 of those. So I can combine those two. Minus 24 plus 20 would combine to negative 4 x squared. And then the last thing to bring down is the plus 40x. There we have it. So again, when you multiply 3 things, you multiply one pair at a time and then multiply accordingly. So make sure to distribute at all steps. And you had something very similar to this in the homework and in previous lectures and on today's quiz. Let's practice some division by a monomial. Let me go ahead and add another term on there. X squared there. All right, so I'll give you all a moment to write that down. So now hopefully you've written that down. So division is also distributive. So when I divide a polynomial, I have to divide every term. In other words, all 4 terms are going to get divided by 5x squared. So let's handle the division one at a time. So we'll go with the first term. 20 divided by 5 is 4. And then remember, when you divide exponents, you just subtract the powers. So x squared divided by x, you just subtract the powers is x. Right, covered that before spring break. Y squared divided by y squared cancels out. Let's go to the next term. 15 divided by 5 would be 3. Bring the negative down. X to the 4th divided by x, subtract the power, so that's power of 4 minus power of 1, which would be power of 3. Then y to the 6th divided by y squared, subtract the power. 6 minus 2 would be y to the 4th. Moving right along, 5 divided by 5 is 1, so you can write 1. X to the 4th divided by x, subtract the powers, it would be x cubed. And then y to the 3rd divided by y squared, subtract the powers, you just have y. 3 minus 2 is 1. And then minus 5 divided by 5 is 1. X divided by x cancels out. Y squared divided by y squared cancels out. And there's our answer. All done. So remember, division, you just divide the coefficients, and then as for the exponents, remember when you divide exponents of the same base, all you got to do is subtract the powers. So you'll have a problem similar to this on the quiz. Don't miss that 1 right here. Technically, I could just write this as x cubed y, and that's the equivalent, but I have to have this minus 1 at the end. So don't forget that placeholder. Let's do one last example. Give you guys a moment to write that down. So hopefully you've now written that down. So 15 divided by 12, that's a fraction we can reduce. So if you want, here's what a TI-84 looks like. Let's see if I get it without the glare. 15 divided by 12, enter. Now remember, on your calculator, you can reduce any fraction, right? You can hit the math, top of the list you'll see fraction, enter, enter. You can switch anything to reduce fraction. So that 15 over 12 will reduce to 5 over 4. So that reduces to 5 over 4. And then as for the variables are actually easier to work with. Just like on the last problem, when you divide exponents of the same base, you subtract the powers. So w to the 7th divided by w to the 4th, you subtract them as w to the 3rd. 7 minus 4 is 3. You do the same thing here. X squared divided by x to the 5th. 2 minus 5 is negative 3. Now if you read the directions on your quiz, the directions state no negative exponents, right? With positive exponents only. So that's exactly what we're going to do. The w cubed is fine, but we don't want any negative exponents in our answer. Remember, negative exponents mean reciprocal. So in x to the negative 3, that negative sign means it's going to get flipped to the opposite side of the fraction bar. So it's going to get flipped to the bottom. And there's our answer. And you have one similar to this on the quiz. All right, so there's a recap of what we've been practicing the last couple of weeks and a little miniature version of the quiz. So if you were paying attention and taking notes, everything you're about to do on the quiz is very similar to what you just saw in this video. So at this point in time, we'll go ahead and start the quiz, and I wish you the best of luck, and then have a good weekend. I'll see you all next week.